Hi, I'm Zach.
And I'm Stephanie, and this is episode 530 of the Lawyerist podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, Zach's talking to Matt Homann about meetings sucking, maybe making them not suck, how to make them successful. Yeah.
Yeah. Today's podcast is brought to you by Tabs 3, so stick around and you'll hear my conversation with them pretty shortly. But Stephanie, before that, we have on December 11th a KPI webinar coming up on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not the greatest with KPIs. I try to hit my KPIs. I know that, but I'm not the person that has read all the KPI books. What's this going to be?
Yeah. So just because sometimes we still get this, question, so there's no bad questions around here. KPIs are key performance indicators. And It's just data, right? It's numbers, but it's important numbers, the numbers that we want to be using to make decisions and see if we're moving our firm in the right direction. So it's the end of the year. This is going to be December. It's a great time. Everyone should be looking at your business, looking at how you did this year, setting some goals for what you want to do next year. And now's the time to really think about what numbers should you be looking at each week, each month, to see are you on the right track? Or how are you making decisions? Do you know things like, if somebody stopped paying you tomorrow, how much cash would you have before to operate your business? How long could you run before you ran out? Not that we want that to happen, but that is something you need to know. The idea of cash, your profitability. So we're going to dig in. We're going to dig into financial KPIs. We're going to dig into marketing KPIs, client KPIs, team KPIs, like you name it. If there's a number, we're going to talk about it, but we're going to do it in a way that we make it easy and so you can execute.
And so just again, for people a little bit more like me that don't live in the KPI world and haven't, what is it? Is it Measure What Matters? That kind of starts that. I guess that's the thing. KPIs are what matters. We're not talking about just measuring arbitrary stuff here. Like what drives your company is what we're looking at.
Yeah. And for some of you, if you're just getting started on this, we're going to keep it simple. Maybe 5 numbers you have to know now. Because sometimes people get a little excited. Once you start digging into the data, it's easy to be like, oh, I could measure all these things. And then you almost overwhelm yourself because you get excited about it. So we're going to keep it simple to execute for people who are just getting started. But if you're in the camp of like, no, I'm ready to go deeper, we're going to do that too. So it'll make sense. I'm going to make this work. I have a couple months. I still have a little time.
Yes,
put it all together.
It's December 11th.
Yes.
And it is $49 a person. We will put the link to sign up in all of the show notes and places that you see or hear the podcast here. So,
yeah. Join us. We'll make it worth your while.
Absolutely. Well, now here's my conversation with Tabs 3, and then we'll lead right into my conversation with Matt Homann. Hey, y'all. It's Zach, the legal tech advisor here at Lawyerist. And today I've got Bruce Politsky with me from Tabs 3. And we are talking about some of the moves that they've made recently to make Tabs 3 and its family of products, its suite of products, a little bit more available to the modern attorney. Bruce, thanks for being with me today.
Great to be here, Zach.
So I think one of the things that's been on a lot of Tabs 3 users' minds over the last little bit has been getting Tabs 3 accessible in the cloud, being able to connect with all the feature sets that Tabs 3, the accounting, the billing, and then also now the practice management aspect of the Tabs 3 suite. So talk to me a little bit about that. What does this look like? We've got Tabs 3 Cloud now, right?
That's correct. Tabs 3 Cloud offering does give you that access from anywhere at any time through just any browser connection. So anywhere you're connected, you would have access to the full Tabs 3 suite of products.
Okay.
We still do offer on-premise. We're a little unique in that respect. But we do offer the Tabs 3 Cloud suite as well. So users have a choice. And if you were an existing Tabs 3 on-premise user, the transition to the cloud is very simple. and it's all handled by our tech team. And that's the thing, with Tapestry Cloud, it is something that we manage. So in addition to getting that anywhere, anytime access, we actually manage all the updates for you as well, and keep the software, on the latest release. And if there's anything, you're dealing directly with our robust US-based support team. So it's a one-stop shop for everything that you have going on, just like it was with the on-prem system.
Yeah. Well, so one of the reasons that we're here specifically today, because Tabs 3 Cloud has been, y'all have kind of made this move over the last year or so with the accounting portion, the billing portion, but now we've got Practice Master in that cloud environment as well, right?
That's correct. And there were some changes we had to make to have those features available. Specifically, when you start talking about some of the integrations that the system supports, and making sure those were all available, still moving forward, and our own internal document assembly and document management, and our integrations with other DMS like not Hot Docs, NetDocs, and all that was functional. The internal capabilities of product were always available. It was that third-party interaction with the Microsoft suite and those types of things that needed some additional work to get that all to work together in that environment.
Yeah, and I think that's not necessarily something that people think about when they're questioning whether to go to a let's say web app based cloud environment or an app streaming based cloud environment, which would be here in this scenario. Is that, to me, what I've found with my on-prem software is that if you upload a Microsoft template into the cloud, a lot of times it kind of loses. I've always just called it that Microsoft magic. It loses some of its capabilities, but if you're using a product that is on-prem, you can get a lot more robustness out of that Microsoft integration. And so I know you guys didn't want to lose that robustness by just saying, well, we'll just take all this stuff into that web app based cloud.
That's correct. And that's where some of the delay maybe was, what we'll call it, in getting practice management fully available, was making sure that functionality was up to the standards that we would expect and our existing user base would expect.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've gotten some demos of this. I've seen the functionality. I've kicked the tires a little bit, and it's there. It's the same platform, just served to you in the cloud.
That's correct. So if you were an existing user, the transition is very simple, because it's going to work and function and look and feel exactly like it does. If you're new to Tapestry software, I think the thing that we like to state is, again, the robustness of the product. It's always been designed for lawyers, especially when you talk about some of the financial stuff we do and accounting stuff we do. There are other products out there that are more generic, but this is designed for law firms. And when you talk about just the ability of the product to just work, I mean, that's what it does. It gets the job done, does it very well, has a lot of flexibility to expand with law firms or meet a lot of their individual demands that they might have as far as billing rates or realizations or comp plans, etc.
Awesome. Well, if anybody wants to learn more about all of those things and see how they can either move their current Tabs 3 installation into the cloud, or check out Tabs 3 themselves, they can always go to tabs3.com. Bruce, thanks for being with me and helping me work through this. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Zach.
Hi, I'm Matt Homann, founder of Filament, recovering lawyer, and someone who thinks way too much about meetings.
Matt, thank you for being with me. I had run across, well, you have been in the lawyerist kind of sphere and frankly lawyer innovation sphere for a tremendous amount of time. But personally, I ran across you and a lot of what your work is around 2020 in the pandemic, when people were I think belatedly getting to how are we thinking about connecting with our offices in a different way. We were having to connect with the people in our office virtually and try to be productive in that way. But now we're out of the pandemic, but still not necessarily meeting with people productively, are we?
It's funny you talk about meetings, and it's where we spend so much of our time. It isn't just how we show up to our clients often. It's how we get work done. It's how we engage with our teams. It's how we collaborate. It's where culture is fundamentally built in organizations for the most part. And yet we spend so little time thinking about getting better at it. We will ask people who visit us at Filament, to think about the amount of time they've spent in their career getting better at Excel. And it's dozens, if not hundreds of hours for some of them, thinking about the constant training, the learning new features, et cetera. And I'll ask that same group of people, oftentimes senior executives that spend 60 or 70% of their time in meeting, how much time they've spent getting better at meetings. And it's almost always a big fat zero. And so not only is there a really unique opportunity to think differently about meetings and how you work, quite frankly, but the ROI on some simple fixes and changes is off the charts, especially when we think about how bad most of our meetings are.
I mean, I think we can all at least point to and agree that like most of our meetings are bad, but
right.
How in the hell do I get better at meetings, Matt? I mean, like, how do I, like, they're just, well, for me, they're all virtual, but I mean, they're just a bunch of people sitting together. We have an agenda. We go through our agenda. People ask questions. What more is there? Like, how could I get better at meetings?
Well, there's so many pieces. One thing I'll share with you all to put in the show notes is a meeting design canvas that we built that literally has just some thoughtful things to ask yourself as you plan a meeting.
Okay.
But one of those things, and you said this agenda, people believe that agendas are, in fact, the guide of the meeting, but it is the most optimistic sense you have of what you can all cram into the hour of time that you've scheduled. And so an agenda isn't anything that's particularly real or meaningful. It's your best guess. It's your Christmas list.
Yeah, that feels right. Yeah.
And so one of the things to think about even on the agenda is that instead of just saying, here's what I hope we can accomplish and here's when, is to answer these questions in your invite that we're gathering to accomplish. Like, talk about what you're gathering for. It's important for us to do this together and at the same time in person because. And by the end of this meeting, we will. And even if that in person is virtual, so oftentimes we just automatically throw meetings on calendars because we're really good at making it seem like they're important, but it is where we procrastinate best.
Yes.
And I know this was true when I was practicing. I said there were times I probably could have dictated a long, complex letter, but it was always easier for me to tell my secretary at the time, my admin, hey, I'd love to meet with them. And you look inside most organizations, and the moment you say, I've got to put this on the calendar as a meeting, I now have bought myself a week or 2 or 3 of time before we can all be together.
Yep.
And so this idea of it's important for us to do this together at the same time because is the crucial reason why people should care about your meeting and show up. And if you can't answer those questions, if you find it difficult for any one of those 3 prompts to be easily answered and compelling for your attendees, then it probably didn't need to be a meeting.
Could have been an email.
Could have been an email. Could have been an asynchronous place to collaborate. Could have lived in Slack. Could have lived in Teams. Could have lived.
Right.
I mean, there's so many other places.
Right.
The other thing about meetings is that we oftentimes are not in the same one, even though we're in the same room. And I found this.
Yeah, expand.
And we talk about there's kind of 4 categories of meetings. There's the dreaming meeting. There's the debating meeting, there's deciding, and there's doing.
Okay.
And oftentimes people think the meeting they're in is at a different phase of those things. And it's even better if you don't try to mash them together in a Swiss Army knife sort of meeting. But the dreaming meeting is brainstorming. It's come with ideas. The debating meeting has come with a point of view. The deciding meeting maybe come with a vote, but the deciding meeting may be the boss decides. Right? It's advice and consent. You've got to be clear on how you're deciding the decision you're making, why the people are doing it, what the consequences are, et cetera. And then finally, the doing meeting is just that. It's like, okay, we're talking about next steps. We're talking about tactics. We're talking about status updates, all of those sorts of things. Again, many that could be done inside of an asynchronous workspace. But what I find, especially in my world, we work with lots of cool, interesting clients in the legal space a bit, but most of them are outside of it. And so we have really senior leaders in lots of our meetings. And those senior leaders who might be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, they don't always appreciate the thumb they put on the scale when they're having a conversation with their team members, especially if those team members are 3 or 4 or 5 layers below them in the org chart.
Yeah.
And so that water cooler conversation where the leader's like, ooh, how about this? To someone who's relatively junior to them, that person thinks, oh my goodness, you just redecided something and now you've changed my entire month of work because I'd been doing something different.
Yeah.
And what we've learned, and I found this the hard way with my team, is that I didn't realize that when I would just ask a dreaming question, what about this? Or could we try this? They viewed that because the lens through which they articulate things is they've already decided they're introverts versus extroverts and so on and so forth. And so being clear on even the kind of meeting you're having and when you shift from one part of that meeting to the next is crucial.
So I think having an idea of what you want from the meeting, clarifying what it is for that meeting, like what it is we're going to get. And it sounds like you're saying you can have multiple goals for the meeting or multiple kind of phases of the meeting if you need to. I think the biggest thing though is thinking about like what is it you want from the meeting? Because I'm going to be honest, I kicked a can down the road 5 minutes ago. I sent an email that said, hey, let's have a meeting on this. I have some questions. Let's have a meeting on this. And they're like, could you articulate your questions in an email? And I'm like, let's meet at 2:00. And I mean, that's
and Stephanie right now is pretending to be delayed in travel, which is why you and I are talking.
Yes, that's exactly right. But let's have a meeting because I don't want to deal with this right now. I don't want to think through it right now. I want to buy myself some time. I mean, that speaks to me of, I have done that many times. And how do we get out of that culture? Because a lot of times it's the person at the top or, a senior person, somebody that controls that meeting, the ability to have a meeting that says, I do not have the time to think about this right now. So I'm going to set aside the time to think about this with you, and I'm going to take up your time.
And when they're the leader, that's their prerogative and that's their privilege. I mean, let's be honest. The challenge that they have as leaders is they have 37 projects or engagements or conversations that look like this one, and it is the default. And it doesn't mean that they're procrastinating as much as it means that they just don't have time for deep thinking about stuff. So where do you find time for deep thinking? You schedule fewer meetings, right? This is the thing you can't unsee, Zach, is that an 8-person meeting for an hour is an 8-hour meeting.
Oh.
And you have, by putting that 8-person meeting on the calendar, to save yourself an extra hour of deep thinking and writing cost your organization an extra 6. And so, for one of those things is, as you start to think about whether it should be a meeting, whether it shouldn't be, is to start to understand the cost of the cost of that kind of challenge to your organization. So if I say, for example, that as a leader, and I'll try and do the math, I'm still pretty close to being a lawyer when it comes to my math skills. At least they've atrophied and not improved at all. But if I have a meeting that is really just designed for people to update me on things, right? The taking turns meeting. If there's 10 people in that meeting, it's 10 hours worth of meeting time, right? Everyone gets their 6 minutes, right? They're sharing, I share 6 minutes. But if I have one-on-one conversations with each of those people for 6 minutes, right? So it's a 12-minute conversation, your 6 minutes and my 6 minutes. But 10 of those are dramatically less. It's 2 hours worth of time versus 10. And so just paying attention to that a little bit, and then also starting to think about how most organizations, and I think about this in corporate America, it takes someone who's new inside an organization years to be able to spend $5,000 without 8 layers of approval.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Even on a P card, right? They get their credit card, they get their procurement card, and but it takes lots of approval. But that same person, their second day in the office, can put $1 million worth of meetings on the calendar. And so I'm not suggesting you need to have those kinds of controls, but if you just start paying attention to what that time cost is for you in an organization, it causes you to think about meetings differently because they are in many ways if we say that the highest cost in our organization is our people, which is usually true.
Yeah, it certainly was.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless it's a big capital expense sort of company, right?
Right.
We work with a big public utility. The people are not their most expensive thing. Their nuclear plant is their most expensive thing.
I mean, you would think so. Yeah.
People are close second, right?
Yeah, they're probably right there. Yeah.
And if you say your people are your most expensive cost and the most important investment you make, and they're spending 50% of their time in meetings that may not need to have happened, right? Think about the millions of dollars the average organization is throwing away.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other piece of it is just how much of us spend our time thinking about, oh, I finally get to do work after my kids are in bed. Or for me, I'm a super early morning riser because I get 3 hours every morning with no meetings on the calendar to deep dive into something.
Yeah.
And so the gift that you as a leader can not only give your team, but give yourself is to find some ways to shorten, to eliminate, to rethink what it means to meet. Because what you're getting in exchange isn't generally more meetings. It's some time to think about stuff that we never give ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So one of those ways that you're suggesting kind of take some of the meetings, some of the in-person, let's make this 15 hours of the company's time, to take that away is to kind of interact asynchronously on some platforms. So talk to me a little bit about that, about like, in a way, explain it like I'm 5. Like what do you mean by interacting asynchronously, and then kind of like what are the ways that we can do that?
I'll give a couple examples. One of the things that we do on my team, we have a small team, but we do a check-in every morning. We live in Slack for all of our internal communication, so we don't email one another. So everything is inside of Slack. Could be Teams, could be any other tool that you choose. Mm-hmm. But every morning at 7 a.m., a prompt goes out that asks everyone to answer 4 questions. We call them our vitamin C's. I'm happy to share them. I'm sharing with your group, but there are 4 categories in our vitamin C's. One is commitments, the things I've done, the things I need to do, the things I've said I'll do. Okay. A second one is collaboration, the help I'll need. The third is curiosity, something I just would love to know. And the fourth is celebration, something nice about someone else in the team. And so we do that check-in every morning. It takes me 2 minutes to enter it. But I get the pulse, and everyone sees it, right? So I get the pulse of everyone on my team, but they're checking it in 5 minutes here versus us scheduling that 30-minute stand-up, right? So there's like just one simple way. You start to think about not what meetings you have, but what you hope to accomplish. Right. Some of it is writing, right? Some is having a persistent document or a place where a project lives, where the Q&A can happen there. It's effectively in many ways what our children saw during the pandemic. Is it's flipping the classroom, right? We want to do in the room together things that require us to be together to do. Yeah. And the things that are just updates that are, here's what I'm working on, or here's my top 3 things for the week ahead. That can all live somewhere where you can review it on your own time. And then once you're together, you've got a chance to dig in and ask the questions, pull on the threads. It doesn't mean you're getting rid of meetings completely, although some organizations are really good at that. But at least you're saying when we're together, it's clear that we're together intentionally to do something versus just to hear other people take their turns talking.
Right. Well, because, if I'm in a meeting where I'm just hearing other people take their turn talking, you would think I'd talked before. I might be telling on myself, I'm probably doing something else. I'm probably answering email. I'm not listening anyway.
Right. You're answering email, you're waiting your turn, you're thinking about what you're going to say. You're rarely listening well.
Right. And the kind of the collaboration aspect, that's what they're working on. I could potentially help them with that. That can come from that asynchronous check-in as well. So just for people that don't know exactly, Slack is an internal communication platform that lets people kind of talk in what they call threads and channels, and it kind of lets you organize it. But all of this requires a little bit of organization, a little bit of forethought. That's not always the attorney's strong suit. And I say that being an attorney that ran an office, that wasn't my strong suit, was that forethought. What are the things people need to have in place, or what are the first things that people need to think about having in place in order to be able to kind of take advantage of this? Because if there's not a place to write this down, there's not a place to go look for it.
So the bigger challenge in my view, Zach, isn't find a place to write it down. It's to narrow all the places you're writing these things down into one place.
Mm.
So there's no one right now who's listening who doesn't have access to some sort of collaboration tool. All right. It could be as simple as a Google Doc. I mean, it literally could be a Google Doc per project or a team update Google Doc. Like it doesn't have to be complex. I think and the challenge I had, and I always joke about having idea surplus disorder, which is why I call my newsletter that, is that it wasn't I can't figure out a way to do it. It's like, every week I wanted to try a new way of doing it.
Yes.
And knowing your lawyerist crowd, and frankly, having been one of them, having been that solo lawyer for a long period of time, that was the pain. Right. And so the thing that I would advise is think about the problem you're going to solve, find a way to solve it, and stick with that way for 90 days.
Okay.
Right? And give your team permission to say, stop. You said this. Because when I would come back from meetings and conferences when I was practicing, my secretary would just hate that next Monday when I would walk in the door. Because it'd be like, here's all the cool things we're going to do. And then a month later, we'd be doing a couple of them. And I'd have more cool things. And this isn't really a meeting tip, but I built this thing where I called it my idea quarantine. And I literally, when I'd had an idea, she'd give me one of these sheets if I didn't already fill it out. And this was old school. We had the tickler file.
Yeah.
Right. She had a file drawer with 1 through 31 folders, and then every month. And she'd put in the tickler file for like 90 days. And if it came back in 90 days and it still felt compelling, we'd do it. And I found if I was losing sleep over it, like if it kept on coming back, then that was maybe a signal to do it more quickly.
Yeah.
But the challenge is finding a simple way to do it and trying it for a while, because there aren't many scientists who do multivariable experiments with any success. Right. So if we're going to try a process, let's use a simple tool we already use to see if the process works. And once the process works and we've baked it in, now we start thinking about the tools that we might want to try to make it a little bit better. Okay.
So we could kind of say, all right, let's do something simple. Let's get in Google Doc. Let's start to put these stuff in. But also like that, you're admitting what we all kind of have to admit is that a lot of attorneys have just a ton of ideas, a ton of ways that they want to do these things. And so sometimes it's easier just to go back to the standard of like, well, let's have a meeting. Let's just, let's talk about it. Let's get everybody in the same room and talk about it. But which may be beneficial when you have your lawyer hat on, but isn't necessarily beneficial when you have your I'm running the firm hat on.
And the other thing, and our clients have shifted us to this way, is there's those of us who are an age that remember, I would get a letter and I'd have a chance to think about it. Now, I wasn't necessarily putting on smooth jazz and sitting in a Herman Miller chair with the dim lights and a small drink and just deeply thinking about that 3-page letter. Right. But there was such a thing where it was a 3-page letter, and I would dictate it. It would come back to me. I would have a chance to review it, and they wouldn't expect an answer for a week.
Yeah.
And so one of the things the meeting does is that at least it gives us the illusion that we can solve something in a given slice of time when we're all together.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though that may or may not be true, right? We talk about so much in meetings that, like, you think about a decision meeting or even a debate, like we don't. There's this myth of alignment, Zach, where people say, "I want to be aligned at the end of this meeting," and then the boss, who's leading the meeting, who's putting too much of a thumb on a scale because the team's just going along with what they're going to say anyway.
Yeah.
But the boss, like, hey, any objections? Are we all good? Any objections? Right? It's kind of like at the end of a wedding, where the preacher's asking, "Hey, should anyone raise your hand?" The problem is that they assume that silence means we're good.
Assent, yeah.
Right? Any objections? Oh, I'm fine. I'm quiet. And then the meeting is after the meeting happened. Right? Then everyone goes off in pairs and triads and starts to say, I can't believe they did that. And so even in those kinds of meetings, operating out of this framework that silence means no. Right? Do you agree? Yes, 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 yes. And if you say no, or kind of, I'm not so sure. We unpack it, we see where you are, but then I've got to say, I know you disagree, Zach, but do you commit?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing more damaging to an organization than leadership coming out of a meeting and then each leader saying the meeting happened differently and they fought for their team, but they got overruled. And now everyone's like, oh my goodness, well, we're all getting fired, or this is all be terrible, versus the leadership team saying, this is what we've decided. And here's a story we're taking out of this meeting to bring to the rest of our team.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like again, we're going back to intent. What's the point of this meeting? The point of this meeting is to have made a decision and go. But I also think that, meetings, in-person meetings where you say this is a decision meeting, that time period, okay, well, we can only find an hour on everybody's schedule, or we can only find 30 minutes on everybody's schedule or whatever. Well, now we have 30 minutes to think about this. We have 30 minutes.
We have 30 minutes to maybe decide.
Mm-hmm.
Not 30 minutes to start from scratch every time.
Right.
And so when they're big decisions, instead of setting them for an hour meeting into perpetuity for now until the end of time, because Outlook allows us to do that,
yeah.
It's like, we're going to spend a day on this decision if it's important enough,
mm-hmm.
because then you can go through the phases, you can think deeply about it. But even when you can't get to a decision, there's lots of reasons why. There's power that's not in the room. There's a budgetary choice that you don't have insight from. There's a permission you need from someone else. Research to do is that when you're having those meetings, you need to capture the decisions we made with clarity. Mm-hmm. So everyone knows these are the decisions we made. But the other piece is you should capture the decisions you need and assign it to people to go get those. Because that's purgatory in the modern organization, is us coming to the same meeting again and again and not being able to advance this project, because each time there's someone not there, there's something we don't know, but we never are clear to say, well, we need to go find out, do we have $1 million or do we have $2 million?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have $1,000 or we have $2,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
The scale doesn't matter. And I say, Zach, your job is to get that decision. And then you come back, whether asynchronously or the next time we meet, and now we have it, versus waiting again and again in this kind of, waiting for Godot sort of world that we end up in lots of these decision-making meetings.
Oh my God, I've been that guy so many times where we come back into a meeting, and I mean, when I owned my firm, I come back into a meeting and it was, Zach, did you contact this person? Yeah, I'll do that this afternoon. And now I've kicked the can down the road again. And so we've got a meeting on this matter in perpetuity. And I've just bought myself another week to deal with this thing, but I'm the boss. And so nobody can tell me that I'm an idiot, although they're thinking it.
They're telling each other that.
100%. 100%. And
their spouses and their friends, right?
Yep. And I, thinking back on that, I deserved it. But, I can think of a ton of times where I came into that meeting and hadn't done the pre-work on there because we didn't write it down. Like, the reason, it's not because I was just looking at it and going, I don't like these people, I don't want to deal with this, and we go. It's that we had a meeting, we decided that I was going to do some pre-work, and then we didn't actually assign it to me in any tangible form,
The pre-work is important in meetings. There's a handful of ways to think about it. One of the ways is like, what are the carrots and the sticks? Right? So when those assignments are, and Zach, if you don't do this, are we canceling this meeting? Right?
Yeah.
Are we adding some teeth to it? The other rule that I really like is that when you assign pre-work in meetings to multiple people, you ask them at the beginning, and there can be a commitment mechanism at the end of a Google Doc, put a little checkbox. Did everyone read this?
Yeah.
Right. I do a message to my team every other week that and I has a little framework that I built, but there's a little box, and we use Notion as our kind of shared space where everyone checks the box that they read it. But in those meetings, if you build the commitment mechanism, I need you to read this document.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone rolls in and says, oh, just catch me up. You've now lost all of the ones who did the pre-work are just minimized.
Yeah.
And I don't need to do pre-work if you're not doing pre-work. And so one of the rules I like is that if you didn't do the pre-work, you can't talk about that part of the meeting.
Oh. So I would be there as the attorney in my office, meeting on a matter, and I haven't done the pre-work, and I can't talk. And which I think is the appropriate, like, that's right. Like I agree with you. That's correct. Yeah.
But it requires effectively your team to say, Zach, you committed to this. Like, are we going to push this meeting? Like, you're the boss. We'll do what you need and want, but we're being less effective as the team members that you have hired and are paying for and expect because of these things.
Yeah.
And there's ways to kind of soften the blow a little bit, but I always think about when we look at the time that we spend in meetings and the cost of that time, it's shocking to me that we're not more intentional about them on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I'll give you an example. Oh, go ahead.
Just kind of thinking about that specific scenario. Nobody's actually in my office going to tell me that I can't talk in the meeting, but now they get a way to approach it. They get a way to be ha 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 about it and kind of slap me on the wrist some, without that they're given an entry into getting on to me for that at the very least. And I'm the boss.
There's a language, and this will sound silly, but this is on our meeting canvas, and it is really powerful. As we talk about in every meeting when you're planning it, that there will show up 4 creatures. There will be elephants, zombies, squirrels, and porcupines. And so the elephant in the room is a term we've all heard. It's the thing we dare not talk about. It's the challenge we're all nervous about, whatever it is. But the elephant in the room we all have heard. But then the other ones are the squirrels are the things that distract us.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Shiny.
Seen them.
The zombies are the issues we can never seem to kill that come back again and again.
I've seen them. Yeah.
And the porcupines are the things that are prickly. They might be hard to talk about. They might be individual. But the magic isn't that the creatures are these great names. It's that you've now given them language. So to use your example, Zach, that's the third time you brought that zombie into this meeting. We should schedule a deep dive time to kill it once and for all. Or, hey, boss, that sounds like a squirrel. It wasn't on the agenda, the plan for this meeting that you've discussed. Can we put that in the cage and see if we've got time to come back to it?
Yeah.
But what we found is that even saying those words, and almost by definition, each of them would be hard to discuss, right? Especially as an underling in a hierarchical organization.
Right.
People raise their hand like, oh, I think this is a squirrel. Or I think this is a zombie, right? The names make it, you've given language to something that is otherwise hard to share. And so to the same point about, Zach, like we didn't you're not keeping the homework covenants. Yeah. Right? Yeah. We've agreed to this. Now it's okay, but you get 3 strikes. And the 4th strike, you give us a day off. Ooh. Or a 4th strike is Friday afternoons, right? Build some of that in that is fun and interesting. It's the same reason why I love the idea of the proverbial curse jar in a meeting. Okay. But instead of when you drop the F-bomb, it's when someone says, we tried that before and it didn't work.
Ooh, the right? Should on. Yeah.
Put $5, gotcha. Put $5 in and gamifying just some of these little things that drive you crazy. Makes them easier to talk about and call out when the behaviors aren't the ones that you expect and have agreed upon.
I think that's the key there is that you have to remember that these are the things that you've agreed upon. And so we've agreed on. And so everybody should be able to hold everybody accountable for that, just like they should be able to hold everybody, in the organization accountable for the values of the organization. But we as a group agreed upon these standards, these ways of working. And so it doesn't matter who it is that's not abiding by it. It shouldn't.
Right. I'll give you another, a relatively simple hack. And the thing I love about our work is we're in rooms of super smart people, helping them think about things. We don't have to be the experts in, their industry as much as we need to be good at helping them engage. And we were helping a big client here in town. They we did a meeting design summit. So we did 3 days with them about, because they had this massive meeting that was thousands of people hour for the executive leadership. It happened, nearly everyone dialed in. The cost of that meeting was in the millions of dollars a year.
Okay.
And we did that. And then we said, let's take a look at some other recurring meetings. And there was a status meeting they had that was every Monday morning, maybe 15 to 20 people, not gigantic.
Okay.
But it was a taking turns meeting, right? It was here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm doing. And so we found a way with a mix of asynchronous work and some a common framework and some norms to shrink it to 45 minutes.
Okay.
And I was like, ooh, so that's 450 minutes a week that we're saving this team, right? 45. And what they did is all of a sudden I got these looks on my face like, oh, we can be done earlier. We can we'll start later. Is they said, well, this meeting will just get replaced with other meetings with people we don't like as much.
I like
and
this
so because they were a high performing team. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's take the 90 minutes. It will still look like that 90-minute block on your calendars. But here's how they reimagined it, which I love. We follow this model internally. Is up from that 9 to 10:30 Monday morning meeting. 9 to 9:15 is optional social time.
Okay.
Show up, chit chat, have your coffee, talk about the weekend, talk about your football team.
Yeah.
Shoot the breeze. But if you're coming in hot or you don't want to deal with that, 9:15 the meeting starts.
Okay.
And so at 9 to 9:15, and our team, we're mostly there. But if someone rolls in 5 minutes late, no big deal.
Fine. Yeah.
And so from 9:15 to 10, it's effectively that 45-minute block. It is things I need help with.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of there's a kind of a little trivial sort of question for people to connect. There's a chance to give feedback to one another, which we use a lot.
Okay.
A few updates, kind of status of the company updates, where everyone needs to be in the room to hear and engage, not just and here's our next 3 meetings sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But the most important part for them and for us is that once that core of the meeting is done, and that core of the meeting follows the same framework, so you can hand off facilitation of it to different people each week, is the last 30 minutes that are left on that calendar, people just agree to be in the same room at the same time with their laptops. And so what happens then is all of those kind of, hey, do you got 5 minutes? Can I grab you for a few minutes? The things otherwise would cause you to punt to 2 weeks out when everyone's back together in the room.
Yeah.
And so they still have the 90 minutes, but they're able to knock off so many small little tasks and questions and sidebars that they couldn't do otherwise. And that works really well virtually in the same vein. You just have to have an air traffic controller who's throwing people into breakout rooms in Zoom or Teams or whatever.
Absolutely. We do that all the time with the lab. Yeah. I think that's wonderful. So thinking about kind of extrapolating out of getting back time from a meeting, and then what does that get filled with? One of the ideas theoretically is that we're focusing a little bit more in the time that we're supposed to focus a little bit more, and that hopefully will make our meetings a little bit more effective. I was going through your ideasurplusdisorder.com, your blog, your weekly newsletter, and I saw this. The most recent one has Grand Canyon focus. I wanted to touch on that. I mean, this may be way too big for the end of the podcast here, but the idea of Grand Canyon focus was fascinating to me. And I honestly, I was reading it and I'm like, oh crap, I can't do that right now. I can't, because I'm going to go into major focus here. Would you mind kind of explaining that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's not my idea, right? That the newsletter is me kind of sharing all the cool ideas that I find the previous week. But the reason I put that at the top that really hit me is that the idea is that, like, there are moments in your life where you are extraordinarily focused.
Mm-hmm.
And Grand Canyon focus isn't looking at something super deep or looking at something super wide. It's the thought is, and maybe this might not even be the snippet that I shared, is, if you're on the edge of the Grand Canyon, you're really focused on not falling into it.
Right.
Right. You like all your senses are attuned to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not worrying about what's for dinner that night. You're not thinking about the 3 client calls to change.
Mm-hmm.
And then the point of the article was really that whether you're able to achieve that kind of focus or not, you could.
Yeah.
If you wanted to.
Yeah.
And with just a little bit of intention to say, and again, so this is language, right? Whatever you'd want to call it, you could say to your team, hey, this is Grand Canyon focus for me for this hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting it on my calendar. This is me on the precipice of accomplishing something big, of thinking deeply. There's no, like, this isn't one of those stop by my office, ping me on Slack, et cetera.
Right.
Like, there's a moment that I'm thinking about this in this way. And so when I shared that, it wasn't just the fact that I'm more capable of focus than sometimes I think I am, because I like that visualization totally brought me into that moment.
Yes, same here.
Totally brought me into that moment. But it also here's some language to use that you can't put on every open block on your calendar, Grand Canyon Focus, because no one would believe that, another 45 minutes and here's 15 minutes of Grand Canyon Focus.
I don't have the energy for that. Yeah.
I don't have the energy. But here's what it takes. The other piece that isn't so much in the article, but that I think a lot about is that, the only way you can deeply focus is by doing a little prep work to deeply focus, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the same spot you work from, whether it's the apps that are turned off, et cetera. And so just saying I'm going to focus is a lot different unless you do the warm-up exercises.
Yeah. I like that. I'd like getting that out of this is, okay, well, we do deep focus with intentionality. We don't stumble across deep focus, And so in this conversation, I like to think about, okay, well, if I get some time back from a meeting, but I can keep that on my calendar and I can do some deep focus there, some intentional deep focus. I treat it like a meeting with myself almost. And
right. And to that point, I think about those lawyers who are listening to this who have staff and team members is if you're the boss, put that 90-minute chunk of time and call it a meeting. Throw it on there, and then when your team gathers and you say, hey, what's the top of mind thing for you that feels like you've been kicking the can down the road or you just haven't had a chance to do some deep work? Oh, here's mine. Okay. Well, the gift I'm giving you is these 90 minutes we're all going to work on that one thing and come back with 5 minutes left in that 90-minute slot and just talk about the progress you've made. Because we trust our team members to do their work, but we don't always intentionally give them the time to do it in the way that we hope that they would.
That makes a lot of sense to me because I know, again, running my firm, my team members would do the thing that is on fire or just is the lowest hanging, the thing that's like right there that they know they have to do, but they don't allow themselves time to think deeply because they feel like they have to be on all the time. That if I walk out of my office and look at them, they can't be sitting there leaned back thinking, which is honestly, I do that a lot. But, in that scenario, I was the boss. Like I could kick back and think deeply about a case and they should be able to too. I love that, scheduling that and saying, here is permission to think a little bit deeply.
One other thing that I'd add to the mix is that we oftentimes are afraid or our teams are afraid of failure. We had a client say this. It's one of the more profound things that I've ever heard a client tell us in a room. She says to her team, she says, we're not going to call it failure anymore. We're going to call it tuition.
Oh.
She says, I'm willing and we should be willing to pay tuition to learn a lesson. But we're not going to pay to take the same class twice. And that second piece was so powerful because you saw her team, and these are all senior high-performing executives who are all looking around and they're like, ooh, I get to fail. But if I don't share that, or I try something without asking others what lessons they've learned, we're all in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think about how we can make, especially with our teams, failure smaller. There's some delegation on decision-making hacks that are fairly easy to implement. But one in particular is to think in this idea of experiments. All right, what are experiments we can try?
Yeah.
How do those experiments turn into pilots? How do those pilots turn into projects? And so on and so forth. And the idea behind an experiment is that it's small enough that it takes a modicum of permission and very little money to try. And then I think about this, and I wrote about this back when I was writing the non-billable hour blog 20 plus years ago, is then how do you engage with your clients to say, what experiments would you suggest that we do? And then how do you get those clients like, hey, this is our innovation room. These are all the experiments we're trying. Would love your input. Here's the one where we're redesigning our bill. Here's the one where we're rethinking the way that we do X, Y, or Z. And you can't do 1,000 of them at once.
No.
But those things now, that's where the meetings are worth the time. Right? Let's think about experiments. What's going to take for us to do this? Let's plan this out. Let's try some things. And now what you're doing is that's where the time can come that we've been hopefully giving back through some of these other models.
Yeah. That resonates. That really resonates. I like that a lot. Well, Matt, unfortunately, we've only got a certain amount of time for this meeting. So we've got to wrap up here. If people want to learn more, about your ideas, they can obviously go to ideasurplusdisorder.com. I love the name of that, by the way. You've got the company Filament. They can find you on LinkedIn. Where else could they connect with you?
It used to be Twitter. Now it's just a cesspool of just terribleness.
Yes.
It's the newsletter. It's meetfilament.com. It's LinkedIn. And then I'm around. I live here in St. Louis. We've got our own 10,000 square foot space where people come to us for meetings. So we facilitate meetings all without PowerPoint, which is fun. We have an illustrator who draws live in every session. So law firm retreats, we'll do that kind of stuff on the road, but we do a bunch of it here. But it's really the challenge for when I think about how people connect with me is just reach out and ask. My email, we can share the email inside of the show notes as well. I'm happy to help, even though I'm not practicing law anymore. The beginning of my career was helping first myself and other lawyers kind of think differently about practice. And I have such a soft spot for the work that lawyers do because it is so freaking important. And we make it too hard on ourselves to do all the time. The stress of helping people through their hardest time in life is enough to also add all the self-imposed challenges we throw in front of ourselves. So if I'm ever able to be helpful to anyone, I'd love to do so. I
appreciate that. Well, I'd also love to hear anybody's thoughts on their meetings or ways that they do meetings differently or better, or ideas or what they think about what we've talked about in the wherever you find this podcast. Matt, once again, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Zach.